Today we're in Valley Forge, Pennsylvania, just north of Philadelphia, with my good friend Dr. Bob Blake. Hello, Bob.
How you doing today, folks?
Introduce yourself.
Dr. Bob Blake. I'm a doctor in Harrisburg, chiropractor. But today I'm E.B. Byers, a gentleman from the Civil War era from Harrisburg. I've come back in history. Today we're going to do a tour around the battlefield, not battlefield, but the grounds of Valley Forge. We're going to just look at some areas where Washington and Steuben and Wayne and 12,000 colonials came into Valley Forge, a whooped army. And we're going to look at where they lived, how they lived, and how they were trained to come out as a European fighting power.
Sounds good. Let's check it out, folks. Today we're going to see Valley Forge National Historical Park, it's called. Got back from shooting at Valley Forge and we found out that we lost all of our audio to the last third of our shooting, so we're going to recreate some of that today. We're here at Fort Hunter, just north of Harrisburg, along the Susquehanna River. It's a period piece. This was built in
About 1755.
1755, and it was built as what? A grist mill?
Originally, well, there was a mill here, but it was built as a fort. We were on the western edge of civilization in the British Empire.
So it's all in the same time period as the Valley Forge encampment. So we're just going to recreate a little bit here today, some of the audio that we missed the other day. So here we go. This is what they call a redan. Bob, what was a redan primarily for? It's a fort.
And they'd have cannons in behind it, and they called them guns, and the troops would be in there. And it was just a protection. As you can see the hill and coming up, it'd be pretty hard to take over this. You have a couple hundred men in here shooting. They built these cabins.
We'll go over and check those cabins out just shortly here, folks. Dr. Bob, tell us about the redan there at Valley Forge.
So redan or redoubt, depending on which side of the ocean you were born. So they were very strong forts, and they would be earthen mounds. And the idea of a redan was to put in troops and guns. In the front of it, they would have like a moat, the old-fashioned moats, and then they would put trees and all kinds of junk in there and spikes. And then they would also take these barrels or these big baskets and fill them with earth and stones, so that if bullets would be harder for cannons to blow up into the wall. It was very good protection. So the guns that they used in the Valley Forge encampment were very heavy guns. They were
Smoothbore.
They were smoothbore, so they shot a small ball. They didn't shoot far, maybe 500 yards with any kind of accuracy. The idea was that the balls would hit and bounce, and some of them would actually blow up. They didn't spin. They just came out wherever they went.
Bob tells me that these had fireplaces, and you can see the chimneys up here. Let's check this one out. Well, they're made out of logs, but then they line them with stone.
Well, it's called wattle and daub. It's a mud. It's like a plaster, and they would fill the holes in with this wattle and daub material. They would mix it up, water and clay, and now if they were going to live here for a long time, every year they'd have to come back and redo it. But they weren't staying; they were just here for the winter. Somewhere between 8 and 12 people would be in here. Looks real roomy without cots.
Yeah, they're probably a dirt floor, correct?
Yeah, they wouldn't have had a cement floor. It would have been dirt and mud. But one thing interesting about Washington, so this would be a terrible place for a wealthy person to spend the winter. But as the general of the army, he stayed on the property. He spent the winter here with all his troops.
But he was in a house.
He was in a house, but he was still here. So we're standing in front of an amazing arch that was built and dedicated to Washington and the troops that spent the winter here. It was commissioned in 1910. It was completed in 1917. And then it stood here for 80 years and it started to have disrepair. And then the U.S. Masons raised $1,500,000 to repair the damage, and now it stands clean again. So this has been standing here over 100 years, commemorating Washington and his troops.
This is a monument to John Armstrong, Brigade General, and J.P. Peters G. Muhlenberg, Brigade General. Let's see what it says on the other side. Arthur Clare, Major General, and John Caldwell Walder, Brigadier General. It's a stone house. We're walking right into the sun, so it's hard for me to show it to you with the light right in our face here, but I'll give it a try. Beautiful property. I'm sure this is just absolutely gorgeous here in the summertime when there's leaves and flowers out here, but right now it's pretty cold and stark.
Well, we had a great day at Valley Forge. The weather was pretty nice, but what we saw the 2,000 or so cabins that the soldiers actually built for themselves. And it was interesting because they were going to live in the cabins they built, so they would pay attention to their work. We saw the arch that commemorated George Washington and all the troops that fought at Valley Forge. We saw a statue to Mad Anthony Wayne. We saw a statue to Steuben, Baron von Steuben, who was a huge personality and was extremely important in helping Washington train his troops to become European quality fighting army. We saw memorials, we saw deer. It's a beautiful place to be. So Valley Forge is important in our history. Sadly, when the Continentals declared their independence, they were not prepared for any kind of war. So they developed an army of colonials, fishermen and farmers, and they weren't trained. The British came, they just beat them. And in 1777, Washington limps into Valley Forge, which is about 20 miles north, a little east of Philly. It's close to the Schuylkill River, It's protected by one side, and it's a whole series of ridges, so there's a very well protected area. But they crawled in, a very beaten army. And then the important thing is, due to all their activities and their leadership, they did not crawl out of Valley Forge. They came out of Valley Forge with a European quality fighting army. And they became the scourge of the British Army.
That pretty much wraps up our Valley Forge experiment today. So thanks for coming along, and thank you, Dr. Blake, E.B. Byers, Dr. E.B. Byers, for the time travel. So we're going to do some more of these time trips back into the past. So come along, and we'll see you then.